On December 24, 1968, three people who were 380,000 kilometers away from Earth read from the book of Genesis. Not for themselves, but for 1 billion people who were sitting at home in front of their televisions and listening. It was Christmas Eve. There was war. It was the end of one of the most brutal years of the 20th century. And yet, or maybe because of that very reason, 1 billion people looked up. That was Apollo 8. My name is Serwan and this is Mars Chronican. To understand why Apollo 8 was more than just a space mission, you have to understand the world it was flying into. 1968 was no ordinary year. In April, Martin Luther King was shot. 2 months later, Robert F. Kennedy. In Vietnam, hundreds of people were dying every day on both sides, while back home in America, cities were burning and students were taking to the streets. In Paris, in Prague, in Mexico, all over the world, things were simmering. The Soviet Union marched into Czechoslovakia and ended the Prague Spring with tanks. The world was torn apart, ideologically, politically, generationally. And in the midst of it all, almost surreal in its calm, NASA was preparing a mission that no one had thought possible, not even a year earlier. Apollo 8 was not originally planned as a lunar mission. The original plan called for another Earth orbit test. Nothing more. But in the summer of 1968, NASA made a decision that is unparalleled in the history of spaceflight. A decision so risky that hardly anyone internally considered it justifiable. They sent 3 people to the moon, without a landing module, without a fully tested system, without a fallback position. Because intelligence reports indicated that the Soviet Union was about to launch its own manned mission to the moon. Frank Bowman, Jim Lovell, and William Anders were prepared for a mission in less than 4 months, one that was originally supposed to take years to prepare. If you like the topic, feel free to give the video some hype. That's really important so that it gets shown to more curious people like you and me. And if you haven't done that yet, feel free to subscribe and maybe consider supporting the channel as a channel member. Our members get to see the finished videos days and sometimes even weeks in advance. Thank you, and now back to the topic. For comparison, Artemis II, the first crewed Artemis mission, has been in preparation for years. Artemis I flew over 3 years ago, 2 years unmanned as a test. And still, despite all the time, all the resources, all the modern technology, the program is still struggling with helium leaks and political budget debates. Apollo 8 was ready to launch in 4 months. This is not a criticism of today's NASA. It's a reminder of what is possible when a civilization truly wants it. On December 21, 1968, the Saturn V launched from Cape Canaveral. 3 days later, Apollo 8 entered lunar orbit. And then something happened that no one had planned. William Anders looked out the window and saw the Earth. Not like we know it, not from below. Not from a map, not from an airplane window, but from the outside. As a whole, a small, blue, fragile ball rising from the moon's horizon, surrounded by breath, against absolute blackness. He reached for the camera. The photo he took at that moment is called Earthrise. The Earth rising. And to this day, it is one of the most powerful images ever taken. Not because it was technically extraordinary, but because it showed something that humanity had never seen before. Ourselves. The nature photographer Galen Rowell later called Earthrise the most influential environmental photograph of all time. That might sound strange at first, because what does a picture of the moon have to do with environmental protection? Everything. Because Earthrise triggered something that philosophers and psychologists have since called the overview effect. Astronauts almost universally describe it this way: dear angels.
Children, you are not born yet, and I don't know if I will ever meet you. That's why I decided to record this message for you. I am currently on the International Space Station in the Cupola Observation Module, looking down at your beautiful planet. And at the moment, there are 7 billion people living down there on that planet, and only 3 of them are living in space. And when I look down at the planet like this, I think I probably have to apologize to you. At the moment, it looks like we, my generation, won't be leaving the planet to you in the best condition. That we pollute the oceans with trash, that we use up limited resources far too quickly, and that we wage mostly pointless wars.
When you see the Earth from space, borders disappear. Not physically, the borders on the map still exist, of course, but cognitively, emotionally. You don't see America, Russia, Germany, or Vietnam. You see a planet. And on this planet, so small, so fragile, so alone in the black, tiny creatures argue over lines in the sand. Anders himself later says that on the way there, he was a convinced nationalist. On the return flight, not anymore. This is not a metaphor, but a neurological reaction to a change in perspective so radical that the brain simply cannot ignore it. And this is exactly where the real story of this video begins. Because Artemis II will send 4 people on a similar journey this April, not yet for a moon landing, but to the moon. A free return trajectory around the moon, 10 days, the first manned mission beyond Earth's orbit since Apollo 17 in 1972. More than 50 years. An entire generation has grown up without ever experiencing people visiting the moon. 2 generations, if you count generously. And the world that Artemis II is flying into is frighteningly familiar. War in Europe, war in the Middle East, tensions in the Pacific. An international order that is beginning to erode under the pressure of competing great powers. And a public that is oversaturated with news and numbed by crises. 1968 and 2026. The same world, different coordinates. There's a question that arises when you draw these parallels. Did that help? Did Apollo 8 really change the world? Did Earthrise make a difference, or was it just a beautiful moment that was on the front pages for a few weeks and then forgotten while the war went on and the cities kept burning? The honest answer is both. Earthrise helped shape the environmental movement. The first Earth Day took place in 1970, less than 2 years after Apollo 8. The images of the blue planet in the black void were everywhere. They shifted something in the collective imagination. Not immediately, not completely, but demonstrably. Vietnam still didn't end until 1975, and the Cold War lasted another 20 years. The world didn't change overnight just because 3 people orbited the moon. But maybe that's the wrong expectation. Maybe Apollo 8 was never meant to fix the world. Maybe it was something else. Proof, not of technical superiority, although it was that too, but proof that humanity, even in its darkest moments, can still look up. 1968 was the year when everything seemed to fall apart. And it was precisely in that year that people flew to the moon for the first time. Not because the world was in order, but even though it wasn't. That's a difference that matters. This is where comparing with today becomes uncomfortable. Because the world Artemis II is flying into doesn't just have the same conflicts as 1968, it has an additional problem that didn't exist in 1968. It's exhausted. The constant stream of news, the algorithmic barrage of crises, disasters, and conflicts has caused something that psychologists describe as collective desensitization. People don't tune out anymore because they don't have time, but because their nervous system can't find any other way out. 1968 was traumatic, but there were still moments of silence. There were still spaces where a piece of news could land, sink in, and have an impact. Today, Artemis II competes on the same screen with war videos, inflation news, and the next political scandal. The algorithm treats them all the same. That's the real risk for Artemis II, not the helium leak, not the launch delay, but rather the possibility that 4 people fly to the moon and the world barely notices. But let's get to the real question behind all of this. Who owns this moment? Apollo 8 was by any measure an American program. If we ignore the 1,600 German engineers, including Werner von Braun, who were brought to the US as part of Operation Paperclip, then it was American astronauts, American rockets, and American budgets motivated by the desire to beat the Soviet Union. The Cold War made Apollo possible. Without the existential threat posed by Soviet space success, the US Congress would never have approved the funding. Spaceflight as a geopolitical tool. That was out in the open in 1968. And Artemis? Artemis is officially an international and civilian program. The Artemis Accords, those agreements that are supposed to set the rules for exploring the moon, have now been signed by over 30 countries. Japan, Canada, the Emirates, Australia, India. All German-speaking regions are involved. A broad coalition. But China and Russia did not sign. They are building their own coalition, the International Lunar Research Station, the ILRS. Their own partners, their own rules, their own timelines. So the moon is not united, it's already divided, at least in terms of planning. Two blocks, two architectures, two visions of who sets the rules in space. Don't worry, it only sounds like a Cold War because it is one, just with better hardware. As cynical as that may sound, but this is basically Cold War 2.0, and here lies the deepest irony of this story. The overview effect arises precisely from programs driven by national interests, geopolitical rivalries, and military strategic calculations. The most beautiful philosophical experience in human history is funded by the same forces that draw borders on Earth. That is no coincidence, but rather human nature in all its contradictions. We are a species that wages wars and builds cathedrals at the same time, that commits genocide and composes Beethoven at the same time, that destroys a planet and sends a probe to the stars at the same time. We are not good, but we are also not evil. Curious? Yes. Negligent? Maybe. Stupid? Often that too, but incredibly sophisticated and clever. We are all of that, and that's what makes us so hard to understand. Even for ourselves. So what will Artemis II trigger? Will there be a new Earthrise? A picture, a moment, a broadcast that makes 1 billion people pause? Maybe. The crew of Artemis II will see the Earth from a perspective that no human has had since 1972. They will take photos, and we will be able to experience it almost in real time. They will speak, and if one of them finds the right words, the words that express the unspeakable, then that moment could truly touch something. But the sober truth is this: Artemis II will not end the wars. It will not resolve the geopolitical tensions. It will not bring China and America to the table. It will not bring a moment of peace to the people in the Middle East, Ukraine, or Sudan. Unfortunately, the list of conflicts is much longer than I will mention here. Space travel does not save lives. Not directly and not immediately. And anyone who claims otherwise is naive or dishonest. But here is something that space travel does. It expands our horizons and makes life here on Earth easier and more convenient. Every child who follows Artemis II and realizes for the first time how small and precious this planet is, carries something with them that can't easily be argued away. Every person who sees the image of Earth from lunar orbit and for a moment stops thinking in terms of borders, this moment is absolutely real. And these moments accumulate. Not fast enough, never fast enough, but they do accumulate. Apollo 8 did not save the world in 1968. But it planted a seed whose effect can still be felt today. In the environmental movement, in the way we think about our planet, in the image that still hangs on millions of walls. What Artemis II plans we may not see for another 20 or 30 years. And that may be the deepest parallel between 1968 and today. Back then, just like today, it's not the powerful who decide what this moment means. It's not NASA, not Congress or the European Commission, and not Beijing or Moscow either. It's the people who look up, The ones who, in the midst of all the news, all the exhaustion, all the justified anger about a broken world, pause for a moment and ask themselves what's happening up there right now. There were people like that in 1968, a billion of them on one Christmas Eve. They still exist today, and as long as they exist, as long as someone still looks up, this story isn't over. My name is Sirwan, and that was Mars Chronican. Thanks for tuning in. Pera spera, ad astra. The overview effect, Beggy.